Imagine a young woman, just 24, so quietly unassuming that most people forget her the moment she steps out of the room. She's not the kind of person who demands attention. She moves like a whisper through the chaos of corporate America. But on one particular morning in the middle of a boardroom, drenched in failure and tension, this invisible soul will rise, and what she says will not only salvage a $200 million 0 cents collapse, it will spark a connection between two nations teetering on the edge of diplomatic silence. Let me take you into the heart of downtown Seattle, to the 15th floor of a sleek glass tower where the morning light pours like liquid gold through floor-to-ceiling windows. The city hums to life below, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing above. Inside the offices of Skybridge Logistics, something unexpected is about to happen. It won't involve shouting or power suits or data-heavy slides. Instead, it will come from the most unlikely place, a moment of pure, quiet courage, a moment that proves love, in its smallest gestures, can set off ripples strong enough to cross oceans. Her name is Ivy Carter. She's 24, with ocean-colored eyes that seem to carry stories no one's ever heard, and a soul so delicate it seems to blur at the edges under the glare of fluorescent lights. Every morning, precisely at 7:30 a.m., she arrives before the tide of ambition crashes through the office. She glides through those doors like the hush before thunder, not out of fear, but from a deep-rooted understanding that some souls only blossom in silence. Her solitude is sacred, chosen not from fragility, but from the quiet strength of someone who has lived their entire life learning to listen before speaking. Because Ivy knows something most of her colleagues have never had to learn. Silence is a language of its own. She grew up in a home where words were rare, not by choice but by survival. Her mother worked double shifts at a local clinic, pouring her life into a job that barely paid the bills. Ivy, still in her school uniform, would come home each day not to snacks or cartoons, but to her grandmother, Nai, who sat patiently in an armchair that had molded itself to her shape over the years, while other kids got lost in video games and Saturday morning reruns. Ivy learned the syntax of silence. Her grandmother couldn't hear, but her hands moved with such grace, weaving entire novels in the air with each flick of her fingers. It was there, in that modest living room, that Ivy discovered how deeply humans could connect without a single word. She found beauty in pauses, in glances, in the flutter of fingers brushing meaning into empty space. Her childhood was filled with these invisible conversations, and in them she learned the power of stillness. She also learned the ache of being misunderstood, of seeing someone you love swallowed by a world too loud to hear her. Now 6 months into her quiet tenure at Skybridge, Ivy begins each day the same way. On her desk sits a small folded note, penned in careful blue ink. Today will be special. GB. She touches the paper gently, tracing each loop of the letters like a ritual. Then she folds it and tucks it into her pocket, a private treasury of encouragement she's collected day after day. What she doesn't know is that the man who leaves those notes sees her more clearly than anyone else ever has. His name is George Bennett. At 66, George has weathered 4 decades in these corridors. His hands, once young and precise, are now thick with time, bearing the quiet pride of a man who's archived thousands of corporate stories without ever needing the spotlight. But Ivy is different. From the moment he first saw her, something in her reminded him of his daughter Sarah. A brilliant, compassionate girl whose voice was never loud enough for the world to notice. Sarah was born deaf. George spent her childhood learning her language, hours of fingerspelling and gentle corrections, of holding space when others grew impatient. But 7 years ago, a car accident took Sarah's life, and with it, George's compass. In the years that followed, he wandered through the office like a ghost with a badge, surrounded by people who talked too much and said too little. But then Ivy arrived. And in her quiet focus, her barely there smiles, her silent practice of sign language in the break room when no one was looking, George felt something stir. Not just grief, but purpose. Each note he writes to Ivy is more than encouragement. It's an offering, a bridge between past and present, between Sarah's memory and Ivy's unfolding potential. And today's note feels heavier in his pocket. Because George can feel the shift, meetings have grown more frequent, the air in the building charged with expectation. Adrian Chung, the company's executive strategist, has been burning through 18-hour days, prepping for a negotiation that could transform Skybridge from a modest regional firm into a global powerhouse. But in all the spreadsheets and press releases, George sees something everyone else misses. That beneath all the noise, it might be Ivy's quiet voice that tips the scales. What no one knows is that Ivy's after-hours life is just as focused, if not more. While others collapse into couches with Netflix and wine, Ivy plugs in her earbuds and opens her laptop to language learning apps. She repeats Mandarin phrases with the precision of a violinist, tuning each string before a performance. Not for a promotion, not for applause, but for love. Because Ivy is trying to speak the language of her grandmother's lost world. 40 years ago, Nanai lost her hearing in a factory accident that broke more than bones. It shattered her ability to stay connected to the culture, the family, the melodies of her past. She had arrived in America in 1963, alone with a suitcase and a heart full of hope. She'd learned English the hard way, through sweat and necessity, only to lose the ability to hear it just when she'd finally mastered it. The cruel irony was unbearable. Just as she could finally understand, the sound was taken away. The family tried to adapt. They pointed at objects, they scribbled notes, but something deeper was lost. Something only Ivy was young enough to still feel. The ache of a soul yearning to be heard, even in silence. And now, all these years later, Ivy has taken it upon herself to find the words Nanai can no longer hear, and to say them in a language that might just reconnect not only one family, but two nations. At first it was just scribbled notes on napkins during chaotic family dinners, quick gestures, a few awkward smiles. But as the years passed, as the children became parents and the household grew louder with life, Nanai slowly became a fixture in the background. Present, yes, but increasingly isolated. Like a beloved heirloom, admired but no longer truly engaged. Her presence was honored, but her voice was left behind. Ivy saw this slow fading happen day by day, holiday after holiday, and something unshakable rooted itself in her young heart. At just 10 years old, she made a silent vow. This was not how her grandmother's story would end. She began to investigate. Alone at the public library after school, she pored over any material she could find on Chinese Sign Language. To her astonishment, she discovered it wasn't simply a version of ASL translated. It was its own complex, elegant system, rich with centuries of cultural nuance and regional flavor. Her grandmother's thoughts, Ivy realized, were not just shaped by Mandarin. They danced in its poetic rhythm. Her dreams were whispered in her mother tongue, wrapped in imagery drawn from ancient lullabies and Tang Dynasty poems. Somewhere behind her silence, Nanai was still that brilliant young woman who could recite classical verses while folding dumpling wrappers by memory. She hadn't vanished. She'd just been unheard. So Ivy got to work. She scoured YouTube for old, grainy instructional videos posted by schools for the deaf in Beijing, memorizing the flickering hands of instructors who spoke without a single word. She practiced for hours until her fingers cramped and her knuckles ached. She fumbled. She failed. She cried from frustration. But she kept going, because for her, this wasn't about language. It was about restoring dignity, about unsealing a locked door and inviting her grandmother's soul back into the room. The breakthrough came on her 22nd birthday. Nanai asked her a question about college, and for the first time, Ivy replied, not in English, not in American Sign Language, but in the language of her grandmother's heart. It wasn't perfect. The grammar stumbled. But the message landed like a lightning bolt across generations. Nanai's face bloomed with such uncontainable joy that it felt like the room was lit from within. In that moment, she began to speak again, not with her voice, but with her history. She told stories of her youth in Guangzhou, where her father sold calligraphy by the river, and her mother's jasmine garden perfumed the entire neighborhood. She spoke of arriving in America, clutching a single photo of the man she married through letters and whispers of hope, of raising children in a country that welcomed her labor but never her accent, and of the quiet devastation of losing her hearing, just as she had finally mastered the language she'd worked so hard to claim. But most profoundly, she told Ivy this: every night, I prayed that someone in our family would care enough to learn how to hear me again. What Ivy didn't realize was that this nightly practice, this fierce act of love, was preparing her for a much bigger moment. Her grandmother's gentle corrections weren't just about finger positions or grammar. They were lessons in navigating cross-cultural fault lines, in decoding meaning across invisible borders. While others pursued degrees and certifications, Ivy was mastering something rare and priceless: how to build bridges from silence. Back at Skybridge Logistics, Ivy remains an unassuming presence. She glides through the day like a gentle current, flowing through the office without disruption. But her work is meticulous. When she sets up the conference room, every glass, every paper, every microphone is aligned with the obsessive precision of someone who knows that a misplaced detail can sabotage everything. Just the lighting, not just for aesthetics, but for accessibility. Positioning cameras to allow for lip reading, formatting handouts with font spacing for those with dyslexia. These aren't duties outlined in a handbook. They're instincts born from a lifetime of seeing what others overlook. To her supervisor, Miranda Brooks, Ivy is just another assistant, efficient but forgettable. Miranda is the kind of woman who walks into a room like it owes her something. Her degrees are framed behind her like armor, her voice sharp with polished certainty. At 30, she has outpaced nearly every man in the building, but her rapid climb has carved away her empathy. She sees staff in terms of strategic advantage. Ivy registers as neither threat nor opportunity, and that blindness will cost her more than she can imagine. Because what Miranda misses, and what the corporate world so often misunderstands, is that real power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet resilience of someone who does the right thing even when no one's watching. Ivy has been studying Skybridge like an anthropologist studies a foreign species. She's seen the way those who shout the loudest often contribute the least, and the ones who quietly make the engine run are forgotten in the credit. But she's also caught glimpses of potential. She's seen Adrian Chung's facade flicker with sincerity. She's seen George's tiny acts of kindness ripple across the building. And even Miranda, behind the frosted glass of her ambition, sometimes betrays a flicker of fear that maybe she's lost something vital on her climb. And then there's Adrian. At 35, he's the youngest COO in the company's history, a figure of sleek control and tactical brilliance. But his silence is not just strategic, it's scar tissue. As a child, Adrian battled a brutal stutter. Every classroom presentation was a landmine. Every birthday party a battleground of shame. His voice betrayed him so often that he eventually gave up on using it. He grew up feeling like a malfunction, an error in the system. But salvation came in the form of Aunt Linda, his father's sister, born profoundly deaf. While the rest of the family threw therapists and phonetics at him, Aunt Linda taught him something that changed his life. That communication is a dance, not a contest. That expression can flow through eyebrows, hands, pauses, and grace. She taught him that words spoken are not always words understood, and that true listening requires the whole heart. "The world will try to convince you that you are broken," she told him once, her hands forming the words with fierce tenderness. "But you are not. You're just learning to speak in a language they haven't heard yet." And now, years later, Adrian has built a fortress of efficiency and control, but underneath it all, he still remembers the boy who trembled at the sound of his own voice, and the aunt who showed him another way to be strong. What none of them knows yet, not Ivy, not Adrian, not Miranda, is that today, all of this will come together, that the languages they've lived, the silences they've survived, and the compassion they've cultivated in private will soon collide in a moment that will test every layer of who they are. One breezy Saturday afternoon in Golden Gate Park, Adrian sat quietly beside his Aunt Linda, beneath the cherry trees in bloom. She turned to him, her hands moving with gentle clarity as the wind carried petals across the grass. "You are not broken, Adrian," she sighed with calm conviction. "You are simply learning to listen in a way others can't. And one day, this gift will serve you more than any voice ever could." And she was right. Under her nurturing guidance, Adrian became fluent in American Sign Language, and through that paradox, through the act of learning how to communicate without speaking, his stutter began to fade, not because he was cured, but because he stopped being ashamed. He learned that fluency wasn't just about how quickly or cleanly the words came, but about how deeply they connected. By the time he reached high school, Adri could speak with ease, but the most powerful lessons had already taken root in his soul. That real leadership isn't about domination. It's about invitation, creating space for others to be seen and heard, listening with the heart, not just the ears. Now, as COO of Skybridge, Adrian faces the defining moment of his career. The Yintech partnership isn't just a business deal, it's the culmination of years of ambition, trust, and strategy. If this deal goes through, Skybridge will transform from a respected regional logistics firm into a global contender with access to one of the most complex and lucrative manufacturing ecosystems in the world. But if it fails, it won't just be Adrian's title on the line. Dozens of employees, people who believed in his vision, who uprooted their lives and staked their futures on this dream, they'll all fall with him. And the weight of that knowledge keeps him awake most nights, staring at his ceiling long after the city outside has gone dark. He's studied the language, hired cultural advisors, even flown out to Shenzhen for preliminary briefings. Yet despite all his preparation, something feels off. Like a puzzle piece he can't quite place. Like he's missing a layer of nuance he can't learn from a textbook. What he doesn't know, what he can't know, is that the missing key has been 20 feet away from him this whole time. Every morning, Ivy Carter passes quietly through the halls, adjusting cables and documents with the same reverence she brings to translating her grandmother's memories. She understands the delicacy of language, not just as words, but as bridges. Bridges across history, across grief, across oceans. Her hands, trained by love, by perseverance, by loss, are fluent in connection. And they're about to matter more than anyone could have predicted. This partnership with Yintech is more than logistics. It's Adrian's thesis on what global business should be. A vehicle for connection, for shared prosperity, for mutual growth, not conquest, not dominance. But that dream stands on a razor's edge. In a quiet corner of the office, George Bennett continues his quiet tradition. Another folded note left on Ivy's desk. His actions may seem small, but in truth, they are the heartbeat of the company. He sees her, just like he once saw Sarah, just like Adrian was once seen by Aunt Linda. George understands, in his bones, that people like Ivy don't rise by volume, they rise by gravity. The morning moves on in its usual rhythm. Then, Ivy hears something that stops her cold. While prepping the conference room for the most pivotal meeting in the company's history, she hears Miranda speaking to Adrian just outside the door. "I reviewed the Chinese translation myself," Miranda says, her voice slick with confidence. "It emphasizes our intent to aggressively expand into their market." Adrian nods, his trust in her credentials blinding him to any doubt. "Good," he replies. "We need to show Yintech that we're serious about dominating the region together." Ivy's breath catches in her chest. She knows those words. In Mandarin, aggressive expansion doesn't just sound ambitious. It sounds invasive, colonial. It carries the sharp sting of historical trauma. She's spent months learning how tone, context, and hierarchy shape every layer of Chinese communication, and in this culture, subtlety is power. Assertiveness, when misplaced, becomes threat. Her fingers tremble over the microphone. She wants to speak, to warn them, but how can she? Who is she to question Miranda Brooks, the brilliant, calculating Harvard grad with a sterling track record and the board's full confidence? Ivy's heart pounds in her ears. Fear knots in her stomach. She is just the assistant, the invisible breeze moving through corridors of ambition. So she says nothing, and the clock ticks toward disaster. At 2 p.m. sharp, the meeting begins. Across a crystal-clear video wall, the executives from Yintech appear, stoic, poised, unreadable. Wang Ming, the CEO, sits like a statue carved from intellect and authority. Beside him, Lin Wei, the company's COO, whose gaze is said to be sharper than any contract clause, scans the room with surgical precision. Adrian begins the presentation with grace and tact. He speaks of collaboration, of future vision, of strategic harmony. The executives nod politely, their expressions revealing nothing. Then Miranda steps forward. Her voice, crisp and assured, cuts through the air as she begins to present the Chinese translated proposal. And Ivy's blood runs cold. She hears it instantly, the tone, the phrasing, the mistake. Instead of saying Skybridge wishes to co-develop and innovate alongside Yintech Hetsofas, Miranda says they intend to acquire and absorb Shoujinghua. One phrase, one word. That's all it takes. Across the screen, Wang Ming's jaw tightens. Lin Wei's hand curls into a silent fist. The atmosphere hardens by degrees. Ivy watches in horror from her station. She feels the moment fracture. The energy in the room shift from curiosity to caution to offense. She knows exactly what's happening, and she knows there's still time to stop it. If she speaks now, she'll be interrupting Miranda. She'll be contradicting Adrienne's approval. She could humiliate both of them in front of global partners. She could lose everything. She becomes emotional as she speaks, the flow of outrage correcting to quiet. But if she doesn't, Skybridge will lose far more. In that moment, a war rages inside her, the fear of overstepping and the unbearable weight of silence. And she stands. Wang Ming's voice, cold and crisp in perfect English, cuts through the room like a blade through still water. "Did you just propose to acquire us?" Time stops. The only sound that follows is the low hum of the air conditioning, suddenly far too loud in the silence that descends like fog. Adrian's face drains of color, and a slow, dawning dread curls around his chest. Something has gone terribly wrong. Miranda, ever the tactician, refuses to see it. Her voice rises, firm and assured. "We believe in strong partnerships through strategic integration." Her words echo confidently in the sterile room, but to anyone who understands Mandarin's cultural nuance, what she's actually saying is the language of corporate conquest, of domination masquerading as diplomacy. Ivy hears it all from the edge of the room, her hands trembling around the microphone she's just tested. This isn't just a botched translation. It's the unraveling of a fragile bridge between worlds. The dream of connection, of mutual respect between two vastly different cultures is disintegrating before her eyes. And all she can think of is her grandmother. Her grandmother, whose voice had long ago gone silent, not from lack of thought, but because the world didn't know how to hear her. Silence in the face of misunderstanding is its own form of cruelty, she once signed to Ivy under the kitchen light, brushing flour from her weathered palms. But how can Ivy, a nameless intern, barely a footnote in the company directory, speak now? The room is full of people with power, with degrees, with decades of experience. Who would listen to her? Across the screen, the Chinese executives exchange glances. Lin Wei's fingers twitch slightly in her lap, small, practiced movements that Ivy alone notices. To others they might look like fidgeting, but Ivy recognizes the quiet choreography. Lin Wei is deaf, her positioning, her eyes tracking lip movements, the way she tunes in to visual cues rather than sound. These aren't nervous habits, they're survival mechanisms. And suddenly, everything clicks. This moment is not just about business, it's about inclusion, about the power of language, spoken, signed, and silent, to unite or divide. As Ajian fumbles with his rudimentary Mandarin, attempting to recover lost ground, Lin Wei leans subtly toward Wang Ming and murmurs something barely audible. Ivy sees the shift in posture. She knows the signs of a meeting that is, in polite Chinese terms, already over. "We may need to revisit these discussions at a later date," Lin Wei says with careful grace. But Ivy knows the truth. This is a final bow, a diplomatic exit. It's over. Her heart hammers against her ribs, louder than the silence stretching in the room. Every voice inside her is telling her to sit down, to stay quiet, to remain invisible, that it's not her place, that this is not her fight. But then she remembers. She remembers George Bennett's quiet affirmations, left in folded notes that bloomed like flowers on her desk. She remembers Adrian's thoughtful nods of respect in the hallway, subtle but sincere. She remembers Miranda, not as a villain, but as a woman drowning in the pressure to prove herself in a world that demands constant perfection. And she remembers Nanai, sitting wordless at family gatherings, her stories imprisoned behind the bars of unlearned language. And then she sees Lin Wei's hands, hands that speak a language Ivy understands. The room feels like a cliff's edge. Ivy's finger hovers over the microphone. One click, one voice, one truth. And then, in a whisper meant for no one but herself, she says, "I can't let this happen again." She presses the button. "Excuse me," her voice rings out. Soft, clear, and utterly unshakable. Heads turn. Miranda stiffens, her mouth opening in disbelief. Adrian's eyes widen, caught between confusion and awe. On the screen, the Chinese executives pause, intrigued by the interruption. Ivy steps forward, not with arrogance, but with quiet conviction. Her next words are in Mandarin, fluent, respectful, and rooted in something deeper than academia: love. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding," she says. Her tone is careful, her pronunciation clean. What Mesrux meant to say was "Hezue Fasan," cooperative development that honors the strengths of both companies, not "Shuge Jinghua," acquisition and absorption. Wang Ming leans forward, eyebrows rising in astonishment. His gaze sharpens, the room tilts. He hasn't heard Mandarin like this from an American, not with this precision, this empathy, this respect for cultural cadence, in years. Ivy continues, her voice calm. "Our intention is not to dominate, but to grow, together. Together." Silence falls again, but this time it is charged with possibility. On screen, Lin Wei's hands move in an instinctive flicker. Ivy recognizes the motion and signs back, a small greeting, a gesture of shared experience. Lin Wei's eyes widen in surprise, then soften, and in that subtle exchange, something profound passes between them. Lake are making this land. Here. We need to do it now, or we're going to die. Your Chinese is very good, Wang Ming says finally, his voice no longer cold, but warmed by something that borders on admiration. Ivy bows her head in gratitude. Thank you. I learned it so I could speak with someone important. Miranda flushes a deep crimson, the full weight of her misstep landing hard. Adrian looks at Ivy as if seeing her for the very first time, not as the intern, not as the assistant, but as the person who just saved the future of the company. And perhaps more importantly, the soul of the deal. Wang Ming switches to Mandarin, his tone probing but not unfriendly. Where did you learn our language? Without hesitation, Ivy answers, her voice anchored in quiet conviction. From love, she says. My grandmother is deaf. I wanted to communicate with her, in the language of her heart. The room stills. Those words don't just fill the space, they bridge it. In Chinese culture, filial piety, the deep, unwavering respect for one's elders, is more than virtue. It's identity. In this simple, heartfelt answer, Ivy has done what no market strategy ever could. She's revealed her soul. And in doing so, she has aligned herself with the values Yintech holds most sacred. But something else is happening too. Lin Wei's hands begin to move, not in nervousness, but with elegant precision. Ivy's eyes follow every motion and her breath catches. It's Chinese sign language, fluid, expressive, personal. Ms. Lin, Ivy says gently, switching to Sissel with graceful ease. It would be an honor to help facilitate understanding between our companies. What follows becomes legend. Lin Wei's face blossoms with radiant joy, a joy so profound it eclipses language and borders. For the first time during the meeting, she speaks. Her voice, shaped by years of reading lips and feeling vibrations rather than sound, is clear and deeply intentional. Someone who understands, she says, that communication requires more than volume. Feeling victory number 1. Ib goes on to clarify, both in Mandarin and Chinese Sign Language, that Skybridge is not seeking to absorb or overpower, but to grow with Yintech. She uses Hezuo Fajan, cooperative development, instead of Shugi Jinghua, a term that had nearly detonated the deal. Healing victory number 2. Wang Ming's stern expression begins to soften. The rigidity in his jaw releases into a faint, approving smile. He leans forward, genuinely interested now, not in strategy, but in trust. Healing victory number 3. Adrian, still recovering from the panic of moments earlier, suddenly sees what he's been blind to all along. Ivy isn't just competent, she's essential. She doesn't merely cross language barriers, she dissolves them. She isn't a support staffer, she's a strategist of empathy. Healing victory number 4. Even Miranda, standing in stunned silence, begins to realize what her years of aggressive achievement had overlooked. Ivy's kind of intelligence, the humble, invisible, emotional kind, isn't less. It's more. And maybe, just maybe, that is what true competence looks like. Healing victory number 5. Lin Wei signs again, her hands graceful with reverence. You have given us the gift of being truly heard. This changes everything. What happens next transcends negotiation. It becomes communion. With Ivy translating, the conversation flows like a river finding its true path, smooth, natural, and alive. She doesn't just carry over words, she carries intentions. She explains American directness through the lens of Chinese values. She reframes Chinese subtlety in a way that makes sense to Western minds. Her gift isn't translation, it's transformation. Wang Ming shares Yintech's vision, a logistics model that serves not only supply chains but the dignity of human connection. Adrian responds with Skybridge's renewed commitment to innovation that honors heritage instead of erasing it. Ivy holds the line between them, like a conductor bringing two orchestras into harmony. Lin Wei speaks of Yintech's groundbreaking inclusivity program for the deaf and hard of hearing, a cultural philosophy, not a token gesture. Ivy doesn't just relay the words. She infuses them with meaning, translating not just language, but belief systems. And by the end, what began as a near-catastrophic failure has become something sacred, a miracle. When the meeting concludes, Wang Ming smiles, not diplomatically, but sincerely. "Ms. Carter," he says, standing tall with renewed pride, "Yintech would be honored if you joined our delegation in Shanghai next week. We need someone who understands that real business is built on cultural bridges, not conquest." Ivy's hands tremble, her eyes shining. 6 months ago, she was invisible. Now she has become the foundation on which two worlds begin to understand each other. But the moment that remains etched deepest in her soul comes from Lin Wei, who signs with luminous tenderness. "Thank you for seeing me, not as someone who cannot hear, but as someone who has learned to listen with her whole heart." The room slowly empties. People speak in 3 languages now: English, Mandarin, and Sign. The atmosphere hums with quiet revelation, as if the air itself carries more meaning than before. Miranda lingers near the door, her posture no longer armor, but openness. For the first time in her life, she has faced the terror of realizing her greatest tools, her credentials, her certainty, were not enough, and in that vulnerable vacuum, humility takes root. She watches Ivy calmly packing the equipment she's handled every day for months. But today, every motion carries new meaning. What once looked like routine now radiates precision and care. "Ivy," Miranda says softly. The name sounds unfamiliar in her mouth, not because she's never said it, but because she's never meant it before. Ivy looks up, surprised by the shift in tone. "I owe you an apology," Miranda continues, her voice stripped of its usual command. "And more than that, I owe you my job. If you hadn't spoken up, if you hadn't been brave, this would have ended everything." And listens with grace, her expression gentle. She offers what she's always given freely: forgiveness. "We all make mistakes," she says. "What matters is how we grow from them." And something in Miranda's chest breaks open. For the first time in years, she remembers why she entered international business, not for dominance or prestige, but because she once believed commerce could connect humanity. "How did you know?" she asks, voice trembling with real curiosity. "How did you know the translation was wrong when you're just an intern?" It's a question born not of arrogance anymore, but of awe. "I've been learning Chinese for 2 years to speak with my grandmother," Ivy answers, "but more than that, I've been learning to see how cultures express respect. Your translation wasn't just incorrect, it was damaging in ways that ripple far beyond this deal." Miranda nods slowly, the lesson sinking deep. Then, vulnerable as a child, she asks, "Would you teach me?" Ivy smiles. "I'd be honored, but only if we learn as colleagues, not student and teacher." And then Adrian steps forward. His corporate composure is gone, replaced by open admiration. "How long," he asks, "have you been hiding this gift?" Ivy meets his gaze, steady and unflinching. "I wasn't hiding," she says with a smile. "I was waiting to be heard." "I was practicing," Ivy says softly, her voice edged with quiet dignity. "My grandmother taught me that we perfect our gifts in private so we can serve others when the moment comes." Adrian nods, slowly. It's a truth he feels in his bones, deeper than any lesson from a business textbook. 6 months, he murmurs. "You've been here 6 months, and I never knew we had someone who could change everything." Ivy smiles gently. Maybe the better question, she says, isn't how long I've had this gift, but how long the company has overlooked the gifts of people it doesn't think to see. It's a challenge, but not an accusation, and that's what makes it land so powerfully, because it is offered not as condemnation, but as wisdom. Adrian understands, in that moment, that the crisis of the day wasn't just a matter of language. It revealed a more profound blind spot. How Skybridge fails to recognize the brilliance of those who remain unseen. That evening, George Bennett finds Ivy alone in the quiet sanctuary of the archives room, where her journey began. She's seated between the towering cabinets, no longer dwarfed by them, but rooted, grounded, changed. I heard what happened, George says, easing into the chair beside her, his expression proud and peaceful. 40 years I've worked here, and today was the first time I saw someone's full worth recognized the moment it was revealed. Ivy unfolds the day's note. Today will be special. GB. Tears shimmer as she holds it close. You knew, didn't you? She whispers. I hoped, George replies, his eyes misty. I've been writing those notes for months, waiting for the day you would believe in yourself as much as I believed in you. The following week unfolds like a dream caught between disbelief and destiny. Ivy receives call after call from Yintech's delegation, confirming her business-class flight to Shanghai, coordinating the ceremony, requesting her presence as cultural liaison. Her first flight, her first formal negotiation, a chance to shape a partnership that could redefine how two nations collaborate for decades. But before she even boards the plane, change ripples across Skybridge. Adrian creates a new position, Director of Cultural Integration, tailored just for Ivy. But more than a promotion, he initiates a revolution. He rewrites Skybridge's human resource philosophy. Cultural fluency becomes foundational, not optional. Departments begin reassessing how they communicate, hire, and support global staff. He launches a hidden talent initiative, quiet interviews and anonymous performance assessments that uncover skills hidden in plain sight. Within days, the night security guard is recognized for his cybersecurity expertise, self-taught through online courses. The receptionist speaks 4 languages. A janitor has been sketching engineering solutions that could save the company millions. The narrative of who gets noticed begins to shift. Miranda undergoes her own quiet transformation. She enrolls in Mandarin classes. She signs up for cultural competency training that challenges every unconscious assumption she once wielded like armor. Her prized Harvard MBA taught her to dominate negotiations. Ivy taught her something better, that true success means elevating others. In the margins of her notebooks, Miranda begins sketching words like gangxi, the Chinese principle of building long-term, trust-based relationships. These aren't lessons in strategy, they're lessons in humanity. But the most radiant change happens in Ivy's personal life. Word of her success reaches the assisted living facility where her grandmother Nai lives. The Chinese-American community buzzes with pride. Elders who had long given up on being heard begin visiting Nai, wanting to meet the granddaughter who had honored her family's legacy so beautifully. Stories flow, stories that had waited decades to find listeners. Mr. Wang brings handwritten recipes from his mother in Guangzhou. Mrs. Chun unpacks old photo albums from her migration in 1958. A woman named Lu brings brushes and rice paper and teaches calligraphy to the next generation. And in the heart of it all, Nanai, once isolated, becomes a teacher. She begins leading informal Chinese Sign Language classes in her apartment, which is quickly transformed into a living, breathing cultural center. Elders once resigned to invisibility are now sharing, teaching, thriving. You gave us our voices back, Nanai signs to Ivy one evening, surrounded by a circle of smiling elders. But more than that, you reminded us that our stories still matter. that we are still needed. Local news stations catch wind of the story. Ivy's humility only draws more attention. She uses every interview to spotlight the elders, the invisible, the overlooked. A dinner is organized in her honor by the Chinese-American community, but she insists the real guests of honor should be our elders, whose wisdom made my work possible. 3 days before the flight to Shanghai, Ivy stands once more in the Skybridge conference room. This time, she isn't adjusting microphones, she's the keynote speaker. The builder of a bridge that now stretches across the Pacific. George Bennett sits in the front row in a suit he hasn't worn since his daughter's wedding. Adrian watches with the quiet satisfaction of a man who's learned to lead with grace, not just vision. Even Miranda sits nearby, notebook in hand, filled not with orders but with Chinese phrases and reflections. 6 months ago, Ivy begins, her voice clear and steady. I thought my job was to stay invisible and cause no trouble. Today, I know, our real job, all of us, is to recognize the invisible gifts in others and give them space to shine. She speaks of Nai, of George, of Miranda, of Adrienne, of silence, of listening, of courage, of what happens when people stop talking over one another and start listening with intention. When we return from Shanghai, she says, I hope we remember it's not our job to fix what we think is broken. It's to discover the beauty in what we never realized was already whole. The standing ovation that follows is not performative. It is earned. It echoes with the depth of a community that has truly seen itself for the first time. On the flight to Shanghai, Ivy watches Seattle shrink beneath her. Adrian, across the aisle, is reading the final draft of the agreement. But in truth, he's thinking about what Ivy taught him. Empathy turns hierarchy into community, and wisdom begins with listening. If that listen at Yintech's Shanghai headquarters, Lin Wei prepares a groundbreaking ceremony. For the first time in corporate history, an international partnership will be signed in 4 modes: spoken English, spoken Mandarin, written translation, and sign language. No one will be left out. But the most beautiful preparation happens back home. In a warm apartment in Seattle, Nai sits among her friends, teaching Chinese sign language. They practice a phrase they'll deliver when Ivy returns. A farewell message signed from the heart. You've made us visible again, the message says. Ivy, flying over the ocean with her grandmother's photo in her hand, smiles at the thought. The image shows them both signing, I love you. No boardroom, no audience, just love. This journey, she knows, never started with a business proposal. It started at a kitchen table with a young girl who just wanted to understand the language of someone she loved. Weeks later, standing in the heart of Shanghai, Ivy overlooks the city as the morning sun paints everything gold. The papers are signed, the bridge is built. But what she's most proud of is what it represents. In the archives back at Skybridge, George Bennett continues writing his daily notes. He addresses them now to the entire Cultural Integration Department. He hands Ivy one during her next visit. She unfolds it. It reads, Remember, the quietest voices often carry the loudest truths. Keep listening with your heart. She places it beside the most precious paper she owns, the original faded note. Today will be special. G.B. And indeed, some days do change everything. Doing less often, everything changes because someone decided to see what the world overlooked, to speak truth with gentleness, to love louder than fear. If this story touched your heart, subscribe, not because we need numbers, but because we need each other. Let's build a community that celebrates the quiet heroes, the wisdom keepers, and the invisible gifts hiding in plain sight. Because sometimes the world changes not with noise, but with someone who finally chooses to listen.